Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 6 of this crazy idea that I found two lovely people, Carrie and Lygia, who actually were brave enough. It started with like 12 people interested in wanting to have a talk session with me, and then it dwindled down to just us, the chosen one. And now it's today is episode 6. So if you've missed all the other episodes, I mean, there's been a ton. There's been 5. Go find them. Go find them. We posted them on YouTube and Facebook group. So today's episode, I do not have to give much introduction because the title alone is like, whoa. So go get your drink, go get your popcorn, chips, whatever you need. This is going to be a nail biter. Love Unveiled. Navigating the complexities of marriage and narcissism recovery. And I want to just put a disclaimer out there. We are not psychiatrists. We are not therapists. We are not telling you, hey, if any of these signs sound familiar, then you are with a narcissist or you are a narcissist. No. If you feel like some of those things are resonating with you that we're going to talk about, maybe seek professionals to actually tell you what you are thinking may be true or not true. I don't know. That's the best I got. Okay. All right. So Lygia is here helping me ask the questions that Carrie and Ryan, you guys have a story, and I just want everyone to know that we don't really know much about your story. So I would love if you would take us back to the beginning and carry us through however you feel comfortable. This is going to be very vulnerable for you guys, and I really, really, really appreciate you allowing us to ask you questions. So you want to just
started long ago.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of true though, actually. So that's part of
the story. We want to know.
Yeah. So I think we met in high school, actually, and we went all the way back, not to birth, but high school. And I mean, that whole story doesn't need to be talked about, I guess, but we got
another episode.
Yeah. Do you just want to start with the difficulty in the beginning, or like maybe talk about how you felt as our relationship progressed, because that might be a better indicator for people.
I guess when we were dating, we dated for 5 years, and he was my first boyfriend, so I didn't really have anything to compare it to. And I didn't really have anyone to really discuss relationships with. So I just was trying to just figure things out. I would say the struggle was definitely with communication and understanding each other.
I was very controlling.
There was expectations that I would call at a certain time. There were a lot of sort of passive aggressive ways of, I didn't feel like I could choose to go hang out with my friends. I had to just hang out with him or talk to him on the phone because we were in college a couple hours away. There was a lot of situations where I just wasn't really sure, am I supposed to be giving him this attention? Am I allowed to choose my friends over him? And if he was angry with me, is that okay? Like, I didn't know I didn't know if these were red flags or problems, or I just thought maybe if I just talk to him a little bit more, or if I do it with his way this time, maybe I can do something else my way the other time. So I don't know. I just sort of stumbled through those first few years. But he was also like my best friend at the same time. He was the person I would call if I got, I needed help, or if I, was upset with somebody, had some problem with school, financial issues. Like, I was calling him. He was like the one person I could depend upon at the same time. So it was like, I couldn't I couldn't choose too much distance because it didn't feel safe. But at the same time, getting too close, it was very confusing for me. I wasn't really sure.
So I grew up in a household, and God forbid my mother ever sees this.
We love you.
I love you, Mom. I grew up in a household where, so my dad had a very rough upbringing, very rough. And so he had, it's hard. I don't want to diagnose him. He had a lot of anger, a lot of like repressed anger. My mom was very controlling and sort of manipulative in the way that she did things. And I think that it was there wasn't a lot of physical violence, although there was like, sort of spanking and things like that. There was a lot of yelling. There was just a lot of latent anger and control. And so I think, as a kid, when you grow up with that sort of very consistent abuse, and it wasn't, my parents also didn't have a lot of friends, any friends. So it was very siloed, right? So it's not like, sometimes people can be in really tough situations, but maybe there's a teacher or some other friends or something that they get that interaction with somebody who is empathetic and is caring and whatever, and it gives them that understanding of what a relationship could or should be. But I didn't have any of that, right? So I kind of grew up very in a pretty oppressive environment like that. And then, so I think that begins to feed it, because I guess we can go in at this point to kind of like my view on what narcissism is. I think it's not super well understood exactly what it is, but what it feels like to me is that, you know, you are sort of abused in a very consistent way, such that you're, at least this is how it was for me, my real self sort of had no self-esteem, I guess you could kind of say. It was just totally beat down. So like a little child crying in the corner, right? And so the way that my psyche dealt with that was essentially to create a second self. Okay, it's like a false self, right? It's like a false ego that faces the world to deal with the difficulties. But the false self that it created was essentially an idealized parent. So it's like, what is the child lacking? He's lacking somebody that's going to unconditionally love him and care about him and defend him from everything. And so being a child, right, your child brain doesn't know what a real adult's supposed to look like, right? So it creates a sort of caricature of what it needs. And that's the narcissistic ego. It is something that when faced with external pressures, like, no, I am the best, I'm fine, you can't, I am better than you, and I'm better than everyone, and nobody can tell me otherwise. Because that's what the child needed. The child needed that unconditional love. And so I created that for myself as a very young child, right? But obviously it's a weird bastardized version that doesn't, have all of the trappings of an adult healthy ego. So while the real self has absolutely no self-esteem, the narcissistic self faces the world. And it's very interesting when I look back on, even when I look at videos of myself when I was younger and things, it's weird. It doesn't look like me. I see those videos of myself and I can see the hollowness behind it, because it's really ultimately just a mask that you put forward to the world. And so, as I've gone through the journey of recovering from this, I've seen kind of more and more aspects of, because I can look back on it and go, oh, that's how I felt. I see. But most of the time, right, the real feelings are relegated to the little crying in the corner child that's not facing the world at all. And so most of the actual feelings are shut. Any sort of empathy or, tenderheartedness, vulnerability, yeah, that's kind of shut down in the face of the the false ego that gets put forth. And because the false ego isn't a real self, it doesn't have that sort of internal fountain of like of love and care for itself. And so it really has to get its praise and its love and its care from outside itself. So it can't generate that from within like a healthy person should be able to do. So this is also why the narcissist goes out and seeks attention and praise and love, because they're really a tiny child that has been absolutely devastated and not cared for in the way that they needed. And so, like, we talk about this all the time because I can see it from the inside perspective, and it's really sad. It's really sad. But obviously, the narcissist outwardly can be terribly damaging and hurtful and destructive. And so it's hard for people to see that person who's damaging and destructive and cruel. It's hard to see that as a little hurt child that needs love and care. I think that's what Carrie did that I think is so admirable, because I don't think I could have come through it without her being able to in some capacity do that for me, because there's just no way to. The narcissism is a weird thing where it's like this self-enclosed capsule where the defense mechanisms defend against you seeing that you're a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go into like how I finally accepted that I was a narcissist, because it was a difficult process. But the narcissism itself defends against seeing that you're a narcissist. So you deny it and you fight against it and everything. So without somebody helping you see it, it's near impossible to see it, which is why, recovery of narcissists is so rare. So anyway, that was a lot of tangential information. But yeah, so I grew up in a household that kind of, funneled me toward that state. I had some other negative experiences too. I had a lot of bullying against me when I was in middle school. I was bullied really physically and verbally. And then when I was 16, I had a girlfriend who cheated on me, and that was my first girlfriend. And I didn't have any. I was very committed to people, right? I didn't have any reason to think that somebody would ever do that to me. Very naive, right? And when she cheated on me, it was devastating. So I think.
And you had no one to talk to about it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I had nobody to talk to, right? Because emotional vulnerability in my family just didn't and still doesn't exist. So there's nobody to go to. As Gabor Mate says, it's not the actual occurrence that is the trauma. It's the fact that you have nobody to connect with about that and help to heal it. That's the real trauma. The trauma is the lack of relationship that you have with other people. So yeah, it all kind of culminated in narcissism.
Wajia, you had your hand up for a second.
Yeah. A lot of what you were saying is fascinating. I mean, everything you're saying is fascinating, and kind of rung some bells for me. I majored in psychology. I'm not a therapist or psychiatrist, but I majored in psychology, and this is one of the things that I studied. But again, it's not well understood, and certainly somebody without narcissistic personality disorder can't understand what it's like on the other side. And so what we write about in books is this is the behavior we see, and this is the effect on the people around you. But nobody ever really talks about what it's like inside the other self. So I have some follow-up questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it appears like the narcissist self has this huge self-esteem. I'm the best. I'm the greatest. I know everything. I'm always right. You're always wrong.
Yeah.
And you're describing an inner self that has no self-esteem. And I'm wondering, when your behavior upsets people around you, if you're being controlling and demanding attention, and your friend, partner, relatives push back, do you feel guilt and shame about your behavior, or do you feel like, no, I'm in the right, I'm right to act like this?
Yeah. So when you're in that, and I can talk about how I got myself out of it too, but like when you're in that, you actually have no awareness of the real self. Like you have this vague sense every now and then that you don't feel good about yourself, but it's kind of not paid attention to. Um, yeah, no, you when you're trying to get praise from other people, there's no, or if you're rude to other people, if they don't praise you, like there's no feeling of empathy or remorse or anything like that. You feel like you're in the right, like because again, right, like when a small child um, wants love, attention, and care, they deserve that because they're a small child. That's what their parents are supposed to do. So that's the sort of approach that the narcissistic ego takes is I deserve this. And I'm not so another thing about narcissists that it seems to be a trend is that they're fairly intelligent people usually.
Mhm.
I have a PhD in genetics. I did cancer research for a long time. I still do these things. Like I think that was sort of an adaptation because you are in your mind so much because you cannot be in your heart. You cannot be in your feelings because it's just not possible. It's completely hardened. It's completely defended against, right? It's way too painful. So you almost have no awareness of feelings. So you spend all day in your head. Everything's in your head. So everything gets really, really quickly justified.
Mhm.
So even now, like I've developed sort of a quick wit. I can banter with people. All of that I think stems from having to be in the mental space all of the time. And so, yeah, it's very easy to justify all of your actions. Yeah.
And so you talked about how you seek praise from outside. You seek praise from others because you don't have any self-esteem coming from the inside.
Mhm.
Do you find that you can retrain your thoughts to give yourself affirmations and that it counts when it comes from you? 'Cause I find that if somebody says, you're a good mom, you're a good nanny, you're a good wife, it's easier to hear than for me to say, I'm a good mom, I'm a good nanny, I'm a good wife. It feels disingenuous because I don't really believe it.
Mhm.
Do you think that you can train yourself to accept praise from your own self?
Yes, it's not easy. So this actually gets into the story of how we went about the diagnosis and then the first steps I took to get out. So maybe we want to
Yeah,
quickly
let's go there.
yeah, because I
Do
will
it.
I'll definitely answer more of this when I
Mhm.
talk about the steps that I took initially to sort of like deal with this. So, Kara, do you want?
I'll bridge this because you asked the question about him feeling guilt or remorse for his behavior.
Mhm.
And the flip side of the narcissist is the codependent. That's typically what you see together.
Mhm.
And I figured out that I was codependent before we identified anything with him. And that was actually a very important part of the puzzle because if he is reflecting back that there's something wrong with what I said, it's my fault that he's mad. I have no boundaries and I have a completely negative sense of self. I have negative self-esteem and I take all of that on and I am like, oh my gosh, maybe this is true. Maybe I am the worst. Oh my God, I'm a failure. Like I'm so terrible. I have to do something different. And so I will just enable all of the ideas that he's saying. And I'm like, yeah, you are right. I am terrible. I did mess up. And it keeps that rolling in that direction.
And because I'm so good at coming up with um, you know, different blame and explanations of things and logical ways of showing how she did this and that's why it's like this. It was very easy to, and it's not a thing that I was doing consciously, right? I'm not going, in the background, there's not a little me like, ha ha ha, I got her this time. It's really just the process.
And because he's so logical and I'm so emotional, he's seeing everything through his, well, this is just the way it makes sense. I didn't want this to happen. You did this and now you're upset. So it's your fault. And I'm seeing it through all the emotions. And so I'm like, well, he must have felt this. And I feel responsible for his emotions because everything's my fault. That's how I was programmed from my childhood. And so it all makes sense. So all of his logic makes sense to me. And so I just continue with this pattern. So when I had the realization that I had codependency and I was in therapy, I wanted to, step into my own power and sort of like find my voice and be myself. And so I'm working through this in therapy. And as I'm like healing and becoming more of myself, we start having a lot of disagreements. Because now when he's saying something, I'm actually like, no, I don't, there's something wrong. That's not right. I just know it's not right. And I can't prove it to you, but no, this isn't my fault. And
So now she's not along with me anymore. So I am, being blocked in my ability to like control the situations and blah, blah, blah. And so it becomes, well, that's the other thing that I could mention is that I had a lot of anger. So just a ton of anger about everything all the time. And I mean, it makes sense if you think about like how I was raised and I wasn't allowed to feel my feelings and all this stuff. Everything got suppressed and there's all of this rage and anger about how I was treated, but I never allowed it to come to the surface. So it just leaks out on everybody all the time.
Yeah.
And one thing that I did before I actually started the more formal healing journey for this is I started meditating, and I meditated twice a day for a couple of years, probably before I ended up like falling out of it. But that was actually, even in my narcissistic state, that was enormously helpful for my anger. And it was definitely something that I think had I not done that, things would have been far worse. So meditation, people, it works. It's good. Yeah.
Carrie, real quick, how old were you? Like, give us a time frame of how long you guys had dated before you started seeking help for codependency, and how do you even know if you're codependent? Like, what is that? Like, when did that happen?
Melanie or Melody? BD. Melody?
I think so.
That's the book that you're going to want to read. Codependent No More. I think she has a couple other ones too. There's like a list of characteristics in there. And I was like, just checking off every single one. And I was like, oh. I did not find that book until, let's see.
We were probably about 10 years into our marriage, right?
I want to say like 7. Let me think.
Did you have kids?
Young. Yes. We had 2 kids at the time. It was like 2015, I think. And we got married in 2007. So yeah, like 7 years. So between 7 and 8 years, I guess, is when I was working through that. And I was in therapy, which helped because I was, at the time, I was kind of having my own crisis and was having trauma come up from my childhood and had to deal with some repressed memories and things. So I was in therapy for that. And it's all connected, like the reason you're married to the person you're married to usually has something to do with, trying to find that attachment that you didn't have completely. So let's see.
So you.
So I thought that there was some weird things when we were dating. We dated for 5 years and we were married for 7. And I couldn't pinpoint it. There just wasn't anything that I could officially say, yeah, this is a problem. It just kept going, kept spiraling. And he was taking care of me. I was like physically very ill. I had mast cell activation disorder. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, autonomic dysfunction. And he was, not only taking me to the doctor's appointments, but helping me when I wasn't able to walk, helping me when I wasn't able to eat, taking care of the kids. Like he was,
I wasn't a total monster.
He was doing a lot of really wonderful things. And a lot of the stuff that we were struggling with was those intimate moments, the times that it's just us and we're just talking about regular nothingness type of stuff. And that's when things really would get emotionally really icky. And I just didn't know how to I didn't even know how to talk to anyone about what was happening. And I felt so responsible for it all. So there's a lot of shame. So I didn't want to tell anybody. So I just sat with this for a very long time, and it sort of happened to come up as I was processing my other stuff. So I figure out, okay, I'm codependent. And then I don't remember how exactly I was figuring out there was a narcissism thing.
I think that your therapist might have suggested it based on.
Oh yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
So I gave him a quiz, like one of those just regular kind of silly quizzes online. I was like, hey, take this quiz. And he's like, answering all the questions. And I'm like, oh.
I scored higher than everybody else.
I'm like, you're a narcissist. He's like, yes, I am. I'm like, that's not a good thing. He's like, well, I'm got a high number. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
But see, this is the narcissist thing, right? I'm like, yeah, top score, baby.
I just gotta tell you, I'm a hero.
Told you I'm awesome. And so, but at some point, right, she was like, look, and I didn't want to, I didn't care, right? Didn't care. Yeah. But at some point she's like, look, you either have to come to therapy with me or I'm gone. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, fine. I'll go to therapy. It took some convincing, but I went.
It was a process.
Yeah. I'm definitely cutting out time. Right?
On the way to this therapy appointment, there was no talking. I'm crammed against the window like this. I don't even want to sit close to him at all. And he's just driving, and we get out and he starts walking, and it's in the Chicago. We live near Chicago at the time. He's walking. I'm 3 blocks behind him, walking like this. I'm so mad. I'm like, I'm glad you're here, but I'm not going to be next to you. We sat on opposite sides of the couch talking to the therapist. It was just, oh man. But it was there that the therapist was like, hey, you have narcissistic personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And it hit you that time in a real way.
Yeah, that was when I then there was a shift where I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's not a good thing. And so funny enough, the thing that made me want to work on this was, so she and I had read some narcissist stuff on books and things like that, where it was narcissists don't recover. And if you're in the relationship with a narcissist, you better get out, because the recovery just doesn't happen. And so me being who I was like, oh, nobody's ever recovered. I'll show them. So
that's phenomenal. It worked in your favor.
Yeah, that's what it'll do.
You tricked yourself into going into recovery.
Yeah. So
did it take some convincing? The therapist says you're a narcissist and you're like, yeah, cool. Or did you fight it for a while?
I think we had talked about it several times before that. So at the time that she said that, I was kind of like, okay, because I am a scientist, right? I'm not. So I there's enough evidence for something.
I will say the therapist that we were seeing also, she had a very commanding presence, not in an overbearing way, but she was just very confident. And the way she spoke, you just knew she was not pulling one over you. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I was upset about something, and he tried to comfort me. And she was like, stop. She pulled away. Look at her. Does she want, she was just managing us like we were little kids, helping us negotiate and have our little conversation. And I feel like she really just helped us take what was happening and lay it out on a table and see it for what it really was.
Yes.
And it just made it very clear. There was no fuzziness about it. It was just this is what you're feeling, and this is how you're acting, and this is not what she would need, and this is the needs. And it was just so clear.
Which is probably very important, actually, because I think, I'm sure there's probably some correlation, but there's probably a lot of narcissists who have a more commanding presence. Certainly I have, I don't mind being in a spotlight or taking the conversation in a whole room or something like that. Right. So when people are sort of mousy with me, then I'm not going to listen, right? Like you have to command presence. And so I think that was probably very helpful. But yeah, so she said that I was a narcissist. I kind of was like, oh, okay, well, then I guess we have to do something about that. And so we had, like I said, we had read some stuff about the narcissistic ego and essentially how the narcissist needs narcissistic supply. And most of the time that comes from externally. And so I thought, okay, if the narcissistic ego is the thing that's like protecting the little child in there, well, I have to expose the little child somehow. So I have to get rid of the bouncer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got to get rid of the bouncer. Well, if it's only being held together by the narcissistic supply, well, then I got to get that out of there. So I have to get rid of the narcissistic supply. So I'm like, okay, where am I getting my narcissistic supply from? Now, from my parents, I got like the not very much social structure happening. So I didn't have a lot of friends. So I'm like, I'm not getting a lot of praise from like externally. So it's like, I realized I was actually, and this, Legia, gets to what you were asking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that most of my narcissistic supply was actually coming from daydreams. So I was daydreaming of myself in fantastic scenarios of, world renown and success. And, I was, weirdly enough, my daydreaming was sustaining my greatness, right? My perceived greatness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just went about being really vigilant with my thoughts. And so anytime I caught myself in a daydream, I would sort of snap myself out of it and go, nope, not doing that. And I just did that consistently it probably was only maybe like 3 to 5 days in the beginning where I was really vigilant and just absolutely a tyrant. Like I would not allow myself to daydream. And after those 3 to 5 days, it kind of sort of shriveled up and started to stop. That was the turning point for me starting to actually have some feelings and some empathy and like slowly things starting to change. That was the turning point, was when I shut down the narcissistic supply. And it forced me to, like, it was really painful, right? Obviously, because then it exposes the small child inside that was, not loved and cared for. But that was the key.
And another big thing at this time, I'm in therapy working on my codependency. So there's also accountability that I am, taking full responsibility for my emotions and my boundaries, which is a very, very necessary part of not enabling, but at the same time.
Because I would still push her to try to enable, right? Like I was still pushing her to try to get something from her, please, something. And she was, no.
Yeah. But I also had to be very careful not to swing too far the other way and sort of like throw it back in his face.
Mm-hmm.
That's really hard, is because sometimes there's a lot of folks who think, I'm going to embody this sort of like strong presence and I'm going to have boundaries, but they go too far and they become like prickly and they are now sort of the aggressor, and it's no longer embodying being responsible. They've now invaded someone else's space. So it's really hard if you have always taken on and you're trying to find where you stop and where the other person begins. It's like really difficult to figure that out.
Because you're going to have all the resentment too that goes along with all of the abuse that you took. So she had a lot of resentment. She had to not then attack me with it. Not to say that we were perfect, right? Because there's definitely not. But she had to, as much as possible, not try to attack me. Because remember now, I'm a small, vulnerable little child with no defense. And as soon as she says anything that's even remotely critical, it's like devastating to me. Mm-hmm. So before I can like try to build my real self up, like I would just be too vulnerable in the state. We still struggle sometimes because I'm sensitive to criticism, even if it's justified. So.
And not to mention, you guys are parents doing all this. And I would like to invite you guys for a second follow-up to this episode and talk about the kids and how that affected kids, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, it's been
important.
Another episode at another time. Yeah, because I know. Yeah, I can only imagine. So yeah, so Carrie, you have all this built up rage essentially, but you have to be delicate with Ryan's recovery because he's finally acknowledging it and trying to take the steps necessary towards recovery.
Mhm.
That doesn't happen in like 4 weeks time or even 2 months time. Like, what's the time frame? And everyone's going to be different, but bring us to, okay, it was, I don't know, however many years into your actual relationship, Carrie, where you started healing, and then Ryan starts his healing. So bring us, and it's still, you're still obviously healing, right? So how many years have you been on this path, Ryan, of that first therapy session to say, hey, yeah, you have this disorder?
So it was 2015, 2016.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
We first had that. And it
And we're in
was
2024.
I wasn't like really doing
that was
a
just
lot
like
until like
we figured it out.
2019.
Well, no, I asked him. So I was really like, I think this isn't going to work. We're going to divorce. Like, we got into therapy, but I was like, I'm going to like give you a chance here, but this has been really rough. And I just don't know if I can handle it.
What year was that? Like, what was
that? Was 2016.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I thought it was a little bit later than
we
that.
renewed our vows in 2019. I asked him to marry
like,
me.
yeah, the new improved. No, I'm just kidding. So like 5 or 6 years, Ryan, for you so far?
Yeah, it's something like that.
It's been like, it's like you really like work on something and then it's like, okay, we found a groove, and then it's like something happens in life, the kids have an issue, and everything just sort of like gets pulled up again, and you're kind of passion through it again.
It's like, so people want the trajectory to go like this, right? They just want that steady, like, I'm getting better and I'm going to get there someday. And it's not like that. It's more like a up and down, like a sine wave kind of thing. And it slowly goes up over time. But on any given day, you can dip down again, and it's tough. And so, like, over time, right? Like you're getting there, but it's not easy. You have like blowouts and fights where we, are upset at each other again, because the thing is, like, we both have trauma. And when you get triggered by something, like, you don't think anymore, and sometimes you fall back into old patterns and you do things that are not cool. And certainly, like, if I fall back into an old place, right, and I am yelling something or something, right, it's not nearly where it used to be, not even close.
Yeah.
But and I recover much more quickly. I come back to my senses.
And we repair now.
Happens.
That's the thing you can do. Who knew? You can say, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. I never said I was sorry, because I was never wrong. If you're not wrong, you can't be sorry.
You can say, I'm sorry you feel that way. You don't take that up.
Hopefully it's clear when I say things like that. When I say, like, I was never wrong, I'm being sarcastic, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully that's
no,
clear.
that comes across. We get you.
Okay.
So, do you guys have advice for other couples who are going through something similar? A couple where, the emotional abuse is causing you to want to leave, or a partner finds out that they're codependent. What would you say to them if you could?
I am definitely like gonna say, you have to understand your own self. You have to know your own emotions. You have to know what it means to feel an emotion, why the emotion's there. A lot of people just don't get the point of emotions, and they're there to kind of help us, and we have to be in tune and we have to feel them to be able to move through them. And you're probably going to need a therapist to help you work through that. And it's slow. It's not, there's no like quick fix. There's no trick. And after you understand your own self, then I think it's really important, especially if you're like on the codependent side of a relationship. It really, really helped me to learn about the manipulation, the passive aggressiveness, the gaslighting, not in a way that you are pointing the finger and saying you're doing this to me, but to understand the mechanisms of what's happening and being able to like hear what they're saying and see sort of like the storyline behind it, understanding the defense mechanisms, because then it makes it a lot easier not to take it personally. Something that has been extremely helpful, especially when we're in a stressful spot, is nonviolent communication. I think everyone should read this book. I'm able to like take that pause and think, okay, what does he actually need right now? What is he feeling, instead of jumping to defense? And you have to know that you're defensive and you're going to mess up and you're going to respond in a negative way, and be able to apologize. That's so big. Being able to apologize is so hard, especially when it just emotionally doesn't feel safe to apologize. It's very hard to be vulnerable. If you suspect you're codependent, definitely read that book, Codependent No More. That will be very helpful.
I think so. Going along the lines of knowing yourself, I think, it's difficult too, because we live in a culture that is very much about avoiding your emotions. And so knowing your own motivations and purposefully putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. Like, I had to stop my narcissistic supply. Like, had I not done that and been very uncomfortable with it, nothing's going to change. And so like, if you wake up in the morning and the first thing that you do is reach for your phone and you start scrolling Facebook or whatever, and you're seeing, like, are you avoiding something? And if so, what are you avoiding? How come you're doing that? It's just being very aware of yourself and your motivations behind the things that you're doing. Because if you can't purposefully put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, knowing that it's going to be good for you, because make no mistake, if you are doing something to avoid your feelings, avoid your emotions, it's always worse for you in the long run, even though it feels better in the short term. So you have to be able to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations, I think, and being able to introspect to see those things is so important. But in terms of like a couple wise, like if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you just cannot get that person to accept that they're a narcissist, go to therapy, something like that. And this is part of the issue with narcissism. Narcissists don't want to go to therapy. If you cannot get that person to do that, despite your trying, they're not going to get better. And that's where you might have to leave the relationship. If you can get them to acknowledge and go to therapy, I think you have the chance. Then it just becomes, you have to work on yourself too, because know that narcissist is going to need a lot of help. And it's not because they're evil and trying to suck the life out of you. They will do evil things, and I promise if they got out of it, they'll tell you they didn't mean to. Because and it's really hard. I don't know, it's so difficult.
Taking responsibility for your feelings is a big one. You're going to get hurt in your relationship, and you want the
even
person,
if it's a good relationship.
Even if it's a good relationship, and you want the other person to acknowledge the actions that they took that caused the pain. But just like if you were like physically injured, if you get sliced, I don't know why that would happen, but if you get sliced, the other person can apologize for whatever action they took, but you actually have to caretake for your own wound. You have to treat it, put medicine, bandage, whatever. Same thing with your feelings. The other person might have been the trigger, but you have to take responsibility for healing those wounds in the inside. Because if we put it on the other person, they can't hold your emotions because they can't even hold their own. And you're just going to keep spiraling it back, throwing them back at each other, and you're not going to get anywhere.
That doesn't mean to not acknowledge their role in it, right? Like if somebody knows that if they do this thing, it hurts you, okay? And they can, assuming, of course, that, well, this is all gets very complicated, right? Because sometimes, like, if she says something critical to me that is important, and she's not trying to be rude, right? She's just saying something to try to help me, and I'm very sensitive and I take it critically every time. I'm being hurt, but is she hurting me? No, I'm responsible for that. So there's definitely a gray area here. You have to, but if somebody's consistently behaving in a way that is hurtful to you or other people, then obviously you have to recognize, like, oh, look, this is a pattern. This person is doing this over and over and over again. And if they don't care, right, you have to be able to acknowledge that. You can't just over and over, tend to my wounds, tend to my wounds, tend to my wounds. Well, then you're sort of enabling them to continue doing this because you're just sticking around for it. Mm-hmm. So it's not an easy thing to figure out, right? Like there's a huge gray space that you have to sort of like walk around in and figure out where you're supposed to be.
I think a lot of us are still learning to be responsible for our own emotions and to acknowledge that we're not responsible for other people's emotions. And as a caregiver, as a woman, as a mother, I think that women are conditioned, my mom is mad, I got to take care of it. My boyfriend is mad, I got to take care of it. And certainly when children are mad, we have to help them regulate it because they don't know how to do it for themselves. But we often are going to try and be in charge of other people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us are like the light bulb went off. Wait, I'm not in charge of your anger, and it's not my job to fix it. And I think that goes hand in hand with codependency, is the urge to fix everything. So even people who aren't paired with a narcissist can still experience this. Yeah. There's room for growth to learn to say, I hear that you're mad. I hear that you're sad, and it's not my job to fix it. Mm-hmm.
It's just really hard to say that in the moment.
It really is. I have a teenager and a toddler, and they are both mad. They are mad. And I'm like, oh, that sucks, but you've got to figure it out.
Isn't it funny how alike teenagers and toddlers are?
It's wild.
and some grown-ups.
Right.
Not that, okay, this is going to segue into like us closing it up. Carrie, what resonated for me, like hearing you say, yes, Ryan was saying these things or behaving this way, and you had to retrain like your thinking after you'd gone to therapy to say, okay, there is an underlying need. Like, what is he really trying to communicate? And I think we could also take that over into people that are around children, because I think it needs to start when kids are super, super young. Like Gia was saying, like, you're naming your emotion. We got to try and help them get these skills to cope with emotions or help themselves with their emotions, which is really hard still. But I want to take that into a follow-up episode of this to talk about parenting from your oldest kid, because you had 2 kids when you were still struggling with trying to identify what's going on and therapy for all this other stuff. And then I'm sure you have 3 kids, right? Mm-hmm. So your youngest is how old?
She's going to be 5 soon. Almost 5.
So she's getting these repaired parents almost, in a sense. And that probably gives you a lot of skill to help her with her emotions, where maybe the older kids didn't get it because you didn't even know how to get it for yourself. Or, it's all transferable. So I would love to
It's drastically reduced her future therapy bill.
Yes. And I don't know. Do you guys have anything in closing? I want to honor everyone's time. And I mean, this episode could go on for hours because there's so much to unpack.
It really good, because we just touched on, like, there's so much more, right? That the journey. I mean, because the thing is, like I said, it's a sine wave, right? It's not straight up and down. So you find little things over and over that you realize, like, and at a certain point, it becomes about figuring out what is healthy and what's not. Like, that becomes most of the journey, is like, oh, I do this thing all the time, or I react to this all the time. this is not healthy. And you have to and it's taken us so many talks that we've had to listen to, like lectures and things of psychologists or psychiatrists or whatever.
Lots of book reading.
Book reading,
YouTube
introspection,
videos.
figuring it out between
Meditating.
ourselves, like just so many things to figure out
Therapy.
what is normal in a healthy individual versus what am I doing.
And the kids really do a fantastic job at poking holes in what you think you've fixed.
Yeah.
You're like, oh,
they're
I
little
guess
homing beacons for
Yeah.
for like
I think
pain.
you have trauma there. Let's
Yeah.
just keep poking that and see what happens. Yeah, so the kids definitely have, if you want to do right by your kids, they will show you the path that you need to go. And if you follow that, you both will end up in a good place. You gotta listen to them because they'll lead you.
This is a super inspirational story, and I'm so glad that you were able to share it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're gonna sign off for now, and it's gonna be a cliffhanger. I'm like, when can we get the next episode? And I think there's probably gonna be like 3 or 4 if you guys are interested in
Yeah,
like
if you have questions. Maybe that can help us, see where we can help others.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we are signing off for now, but stay tuned. So much more to come.
Thank you guys for having
you.
us.
Bye.
Bye.